Everyone knows Aliens is great, and yet there is something about it that still catches people off guard. It's not just the action, not just the effects. There is something deeper at work, something most films never quite manage to pull off. In this video, I'll break down how Aliens achieves that through structure, tone, theme, and character works that still sets it apart. And near the end, I'll share something more personal, a connection I haven't made before, until I revisited the whole series here in the cold deck, where the signal's weak, but the stories stay sharp. Let's get into it. When you look at Aliens on its own, it's easy to notice just how well the film is structured. It follows a clear 3-act arc with steadily rising intensity and strong forward momentum. The first act is mostly about Ripley waking from stasis and the journey towards her decision to return to LV-426. The film gives us plenty of time early on, not just to set up the premise, but to get to know Ripley and the squad of Marines who will make up her team. The pacing is tight, but it's not rushed. There's gradual build-up of danger and tension, and we know things are going to go bad, we just don't know when or how. The midpoint of the film comes when they find the colonists, only to discover that they have all been cocooned and used as host for new Xenomorphs. That shift completely reframes the mission, and from that point forward, everything accelerates. When Newt is taken near the end of the second act, the film shifts into a relentless, increasingly intense third act. And even after what feels like the big climax, Ripley facing the Queen in the hive, we get one last surge of action and suspense once they return to the main ship. All of this gives Aliens a sense of drive and cohesion that really stays with you. In comparison, the first film, Alien from 1979, has a simpler structure. It leans more on mystery and claustrophobia than on a clear narrative progression. Many have described this as a kind of gothic, haunted house in space, and that's not far off. This isn't about military strategy or tactical escalation, it's about surviving an incomprehensible creature in a confined space. The film still follows a 3-act shape, but the plot is narrower. The first act covers the crew waking up and landing on LV-426. The first plot point marking the shift into Act 2 is when Kane gets face-tugged. The midpoint is a chestburster scene. Again, the midpoint becomes a strong turning point for the direction of the story, even though writers tend to think of the entire middle stretch as one continuous act. And heading into Act 3, it's purely about survival. Ripley doesn't fully become the protagonist until the others have been picked off. The film prioritizes atmosphere over tempo, and for viewers already familiar with the plot, it can feel a bit slow today, but for many that's exactly what makes it timeless. In Alien 3, the filmmakers tried to recapture some of the structure from the first film. One xenomorph, a closed environment, Ripley alone against the threat. But this time it takes place on a prison planet with a new and fairly chaotic set of characters. Many viewers feel a kind of emotional disconnect right from the start when it's revealed that Hicks and Newt have died. That sets a much darker tone and wipes out the relationships that Aliens spent so much time building. The structure from that point on is more uneven. It takes a long time to establish the new setting and cast, and several subplots are introduced without really being resolved. The midpoint doesn't arrive until quite late, when Ripley discovers she's carrying an alien queen. It changes the threat she's facing, but by then the film has spent a lot of time building something else. Instead of a clear shift in direction, the second act becomes muddled. We get long stretches of confused characters running in panic, and the tension begins to fall apart because the structure doesn't hold together. And even though Ripley sacrifices herself at the end to take the alien queen with her, it doesn't land a satisfying resolution to her character arc. For many, it just feels disconnected. Then we have Alien Resurrection, which starts with an entirely new premise. Ripley has been cloned and now has alien hybrid DNA. It makes her physically stronger and more mysterious, but also turns her into a very different character. The plot centers on scientific experimentation and the misuse of cloning technology, and it introduces a new group of characters with a tone that's often dark but borderline parodic. The film spends over 40% of its runtime before the Xenomorphs even escape, making the first act unusually long, and putting an extra pressure on the rest of the structure to catch up. If the shift into Act 2 happens before the aliens break free, maybe the turning point is to reveal that the cargo brought aboard actually consists of human hosts meant for alien breeding, but it's not a particularly emotional or dramatic moment. The middle section feels like a series of loosely connected obstacles, and the action sequence lack the tight control and suspense that Aliens delivered so well. The climax arrives abruptly, and the introduction of the hybrid creature happens so late that there's barely time to develop it before it's eliminated. The whole thing plays more like a chain of separate ideas than a unified narrative arc. But story isn't everything. Just as important is how the story feels, so let's talk about tone and theme. One of the reasons the Alien series has stood the test of time is that it's always been about more than just monsters in dark hallways. Each film explores different themes and shifts in tone, giving the series an identity that keeps evolving. The first film, Alien, sets a tone. It's a story about powerlessness, about facing something unknown and uncontrollable. It blends science fiction with gothic horror, and its themes revolve around invasion, the body reproduction, but also around how people are sacrificed for profit. The looming presence of Weyland-Yutani turns the film into a critique of corporate exploitation, just as much as it's a horror story. And it's all delivered through a dark, slow atmosphere where the tension builds through silence and awaiting more than through action or spectacle. Aliens, on the other hand, takes the series in a completely different direction, both thematically and tonally. We enter the world of action drama, with strong war parallels and a much faster pace. The film is often read as a metaphor for the Vietnam War, a technologically superior force underestimating its enemy and losing control. But there's more than just shooting and explosions. One of the film's central themes is motherhood. Ripley carries the grief of having lost her daughter, and the relationship with Newt becomes a way to process that loss. It gives the film an emotional anchor, and creates a striking contrast between the brutality of war and the tenderness of protecting a child. The ending is also more hopeful than any of the other films. Ripley survives, but this time she's not alone. It's a victory rooted in humanity, not just survival. Then comes Alien 3, and it throws all that hope straight out the window. The tone shifts completely. We're back in a dark, claustrophobic world, but now with an even more nihilistic outlook. The film explores themes of guilt, faith, and sacrifice. Ripley is no longer a hero fighting to live. She's a character carrying death inside her, quite literally. The Xenomorph takes a near-religious role in this film, and many of the characters meet it with a kind of faith or acceptance rather than resistance. It's thematically heavy, but not necessarily very nuanced. The film makes serious choices, but doesn't always give the audience enough emotional support to carry them. Resurrection goes in the opposite direction. Here both tone and theme are pushed to extremes, and the result is a film that many experience as total chaos. On one side we have dark and grotesque ideas, cloning, human-alien hybrids, and corrupted science. But on the other we have characters and scenes delivered with comic book sarcasm and exaggerated humor. The film still deals with motherhood, identity, and what it means to be human, but in a warped, stylized form. Ripley's relationship with the new creature born of both her and the Queen echoes what we saw in Aliens, but this time it feels alienating and disturbing rather than touching. The tone of the series shifts radically from film to film, and for many, Aliens is the one that balances these contrasts best. Fear and hope, humanity and monstrosity, vulnerability and strength. It's a film that doesn't just want to scare you, it wants you to feel something. One of the greatest strengths of Aliens is the way it handles its characters. The film doesn't just have a strong lead, it has a supporting cast that feels alive, distinct, and deeply functional to the story. Above all, this is seen in Ripley herself. At the beginning she's marked by trauma and distrust, but as the film unfolds, we see her regain her strength. She steps into a leadership role with a group that doesn't initially take her seriously. And she does it not through a sudden transformation, but gradually, credibly, through her actions and decisions. The Marines around her play a big part in what makes the film work. They're clearly defined through contrasting personalities. Vasquez, Hudson, Hicks, Gorman, and the dynamic between them brings energy and tension. At first, they might come off as stereotypes, but the film lets them grow. They go from cocky and overconfident to confronted by fear, failure, and humility. It's not deeply psychological, but it feels real, and it makes us care more than we might have expected. Another key element is Ripley's relationship with Newt. This is where the film's emotional core lies. Ripley has lost her daughter. We're told this outright, and her bond with Newt becomes a reflection of that loss and a second chance. It gives the story a layer that elevates it above many other action films from its time, and that's one of the reasons it holds up so well today. Compared to that, Alien feels more ensemble-driven. There isn't a clear hero from the start. The crew of the Nostromo function as a group, and the focus shifts between them until Ripley emerges as the last one standing. The dialogue between the characters feel natural and grounded, and there's a blue-collar realism to the entire crew. They don't talk like heroes, they talk like workers. That gives the film a certain authenticity, though it also means it takes longer for the audience to figure out who to root for. It's only towards the end that Ripley fully steps into the role of a protagonist. In Alien 3, the most engaging character relationship is between Ripley and Dr. Clemens. The rest of the cast, the inmates on the prison planet, have interesting premises, but most of them are either underdeveloped or presented so chaotically that it's hard to invest in them. By killing off both Newt and Hicks in the opening, the film severs the emotional thread that Aliens worked so hard to build, and that sets a colder tone from the start. Ripley herself is now on a downward path, gradually losing hope and direction. It's a bold choice, but it also makes her harder to connect with. Many viewers feel more distance from her than in the previous two films. Resurrection takes the characters in a completely new direction. Ripley is no longer Ripley, she's a clone, with new abilities and a new view on the people around her. It makes her mysterious, but also more detached. We're introduced to a new group of characters: smugglers, scientists, military personnel, many of whom are written with a kind of sarcastic edge that feel out of place in the Alien universe. They have their moments, but they don't form the kind of relationships and arcs we saw in the earlier films. Ripley has a few interesting interactions, especially with the character Cole, but it's hard to feel the same kind of emotional connection. It's as if the film is trying to say something about identity and alienation, but without fully grounding those ideas in character development. All of this makes Aliens the entry in the series that many hold up as having the strongest ensemble. Not necessarily because it's more complex, but because it works in harmony with the film's structure, themes, and tone. The characters are clear, they change, and we care about them. And that means we walk away with more than just suspense. We walk away with something that feels real. We're heading back to the Sulaco, so if you don't want to be left behind, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, stay frosty. This outpost gets lonely without feedback from Earth. Okay, final part. This one's personal. I mentioned it in the beginning, that there was something I only recently came to realize despite how many times I've seen this film. It might seem obvious when you hear it, but for me it helped explain why Aliens resonates so deeply with me, and maybe it'll do the same for you. See, when you start watching Aliens, the film already has an advantage. Everyone knows what the Xenomorphs are capable of after the first movie. That threat is present right from the moment Ripley faces a committee in the opening, and it follows her as she boards the Sulaco and prepares to return to LV-426. There's a growing sense of unease from the very beginning. But there is one thing that runs through the rest of the film that I didn't fully appreciate until now. At first, I thought it was simply the isolation, that they're far from hell completely on their own. And maybe that's part of it. I'm a huge fan of submarine movies too, and it's a similar thing. Trapped far below the surface, cut off from the outside world. And yes, the isolation is present for a good 80% of Aliens, but there's something else too. They are never safe. The threat is always there. You know the Xenomorphs could appear at any moment. Even in the quiet scenes, you feel it. They mostly come at night. Mostly. That tension never lets go. It doesn't just rise and fall with the action, it lingers. It's always in the room. And that does something to you as a viewer. Even though parts of the first movie has that too, it's not quite the same. There's only one Xenomorph in Alien, and we don't even know how dangerous it really is until 75% into the film. Until then, we only see the facehugger and the little chestburster. In Alien 3, it's not there in the same way either. The early part of the film focuses on a threat from the other inmates, and then it shifts to the alien. But that constant, creeping sense of danger isn't really sustained. And the same is true for the fourth film. There are moments where the threat feels close, but never for long stretches. Have you ever noticed what you feel while watching these films? What kind of tension they create and how that shapes your experience? A good film is so much more than just plot and characters. And for me, Aliens will always hold that special place in my heart because of that feeling. Because it never lets you go. Have you experienced that feeling in other films too? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear about it. Otherwise, I can recommend one of these videos next. That's it for now. The story continues, end of log. See you next time.